In this video, I'm going to teach you how to be a real psychic, but I'm not just going to use crystal balls and other tarot cards and things like that. I'm going to teach you how to truly read minds and how to look like you have a visceral understanding of how people work. Now, to do this, we're going to use psychology. Now, don't run away. This is still magic. This is real wizardry. And so what I wanted to do is to kind of go through some of the cool things that science has taught us about this black art, or this magical occult skill set of the psychics. So if you haven't already, click that like button, subscribe, ding that bell. It's all coming up right now. The first thing that I wanted to talk to you about was cold reading. Now, cold reading is a technique that psychics have been using for generations, and it's a really powerful technique. Now, let me try to explain what that means and how it works. Cold reading is really where you go to someone completely cold. In other words, you don't know anything about them, you've never met them, and you have to then do a reading, a psychic reading based on the appearance of that person. Now, when I say based on appearance, you can also do it over the phone, but here's how it works. If I was to say something to you like, you like to be involved about decisions that are made about your career, that's a fairly straightforward statement, isn't it? Well, these are called Barnum statements, and they tend to be linked to pretty much everybody. They seem to be almost universal. Now, these statements are really generic and unspecific, but they sound like I have a very good insight into who you are and what you like. If I were to say something like, you really like dogs, I might pause there and then see how the other person reacts. If they were to react positively, then I would just leave it. If they were to react negatively, I might say, but you prefer cats. Because most people either like one or the other. And then if you say, but you prefer cats, and you're still getting a negative response, you then still might say something like, but you're not really into animals much. And at that point, you might get a hit, and then you leave it. Now, the cool thing about human beings is that they tend to have quite a negative bias. In other words, they tend to focus on the times that things don't quite work out. So you might have on YouTube 100 good comments and one bad one, and people will focus entirely on that bad one and really eat themselves up about it. Now, this seems to be a general rule of human beings, except when someone is talking about you. Now, if I was to say something about you, and I was constantly missing, just not really hitting the mark, and just not really getting you particularly well, this is where something called the connection bias comes in. Now, the connection bias overrides that negativity bias. In other words, we're trying to connect. Human beings are social creatures at the end of the day, and what we're trying to do is to make these sorts of connections. And so, although we do have a negativity bias, we've also got that connection bias which overrides the negativity bias. In other words, if I say something and it keeps on missing, it doesn't really sound like I'm talking about you, and then I say something that really does resonate, you might then hook into it and just kind of remember, hey, this person's like me. This person's trying to gain rapport with me. This person's trying to make a connection. And at that point, you almost forget and forgive all of the wrong things that I've said in the past. And this is how psychics can make it sound like they know you. Now, this video isn't about how to be a fake psychic, it's about how to be a real one. And what's interesting about that is that if other people believe that you are real, it may as well be true. But what's going to happen as you start to hone your skills with becoming a real psychic is you're going to become more and more educated about how to convince people that you are psychic. And in a similar way, I guess, to Hogwarts or any other kind of magic school, the more you know about magic, the less magical it will seem, because it's almost like you've got this docket where you just go, this is how to do magic. And if you've got an instruction manual, the magic tends to wane. I've already mentioned this in other videos, but once you've got these sorts of techniques, especially cold reading, you can start to see some things that other people aren't going to see, and you can start to manipulate people by using the good things that you're saying to outweigh all of the bad things that you're saying. Now, this kind of links into something called the Forer effect, F-O-R-E-R, and it's named after a psychologist who did an experiment where they took a whole load of different horoscopes and they just snipped out whether it was a Taurus or a Pisces or whatever those signs were, and they replaced them. They switched them around and they just sort of said, this is your sign, and handed it out to a whole bunch of different people. And what they noticed was that because people were reading things that were ostensibly supposed to be about themselves, they deemed them as true. Now, a long time ago, I used to have my own radio show, and sometimes I would do appearances on other people's radio shows. On one such appearance, I read a script. Now, this script sounded like I was doing a psychic reading for the person who'd phoned in. But what it was a bunch of Barnum statements, which I've already mentioned on this video, and they sound very specific, but they're not. Now, what's really cool is that even over the phone, you can use things called micro expressions. People might use non-verbal body language. Things like, well. That sort of vocalization can give you a hint as to whether or not people are buying into what you're saying. Now, what's really cool is that if you just tell people that you can read palms, even if you can't, you can use this as an in to talk to anybody, and before long you're going to have a whole queue of people out of the pub or out of wherever you are asking you to look at their palm. So you can use these techniques really easily to influence people like a real wizard, and if you want to know more about that sort of thing, there's a video right here. Thanks very much for watching. Click that like button, subscribe and ding that bell, and if you want to see these videos before anybody else, have a look down in the description. You can become a member for £1.99 per month. I'll be back next time with some more magical awesomeness, but until next time, as always,
Very magical.
okay, I think that's enough for now.